And you are live.
Good morning. Welcome to Unity of Springfield, Adult Education, World Religions and New Thought. And my name is John Braucher, and today we're going to go over Richard Rohr's The Universal Christ. The first half, part one. We're just going to go through part one of the book. And Richard Rohr, for those who are not familiar with him, is a globally recognized ecumenical teacher, bearing witness to the universal awakening within Christian mysticism and the perennial tradition. He's a Franciscan priest of the New Mexico province and founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I assume that he still is. He's getting up in age, and I'm not sure exactly what he's doing right now. But his teachings grounded in Franciscan alternative orthodoxy, that practices of contemplation and self-emptying, and expressing itself in radical compassion, particularly for the socially marginalized. He's written numerous books, including A Spring Within Us, Just This, The Divine Dance, Breathing Underwater, and Immortal Diamond, and Falling Upward. And of course, The Universal Christ. And I think he's had another one out since. So, just does somebody know how to
The green noise.
adjust the volume?
Test this at the same time. Test.
Are you wanting to do? There you go. Is that better?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
thank you.
So, if you will, just relax to the best of your ability. And I'm going to read a poem called Love After Love. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, when each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you. All your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. So when I decided that I wanted to do this, I must admit I was a practicing Catholic for quite a few years, several years. I was a convert to Catholicism, and had to give it up for Lent one year, and then found Unity. But what I still love the Catholic Church because I was drawn to the mysticism that, and the history of mysticism within the Catholic Church, and the history of the Catholic Church. It's a long history of that. And and in my belief that the evolution of the Catholic Church could be very similar to what occurred when Unity sprung up in the early 1900s. And there's a similar trajectory, at least from the mystical part of the Catholic Church. And Richard Rohr kind of represents the current of that movement within the Catholic Church. And so this book was written to Catholics, generally. So I mean, in the language and such is that way. And I left some things kind of out and just kind of glossed over some things. I'm not going to really highlight them because but he does use the word God. So you can place mark whatever energy, whatever words that are more comfortable to you, but that is something that he does do. So he starts off with there's a quote that I liked. Quite suddenly I saw with my mind, but as vividly as the wonderful picture, Christ in them all, not only as it was at that moment, not only all the people in all the countries of the world, but all those people who lived in the past and all those yet to come. And it's a quote by this Carol Houselander. And one of the things that she did was that she was in an underground train, and quite suddenly, she says, I saw with my mind, as vividly as a wonderful picture, Christ in them all. But I saw more than that. Not only was Christ in every one of them, living in them, dying in them, rejoicing in them, sorrowing in them, but because he was in them, and because they were here, the whole world was here too. Here in this underground train. Not only the world as it was at that moment, not only all the people in the countries of the world, but all those people who had lived in the past and all those yet to come. So she had this experience when she was on the subway.
Same vision.
Of just, it's an experience that I've had a lot, especially when I was working. And when I would try, when I would spend time with people in a psychotherapy relationship, I would just see them, not the physical self, but just this, I don't know how, for lack of a better word, he calls it the Christ within. I didn't call it that at the time, but it was just the best of them, this, I don't know, the potential, this unseen potential that somehow I could see it. I don't know how to explain it. Not visually see it, but yeah.
I know what you're talking about. I call that the essence of the person,
Okay.
rather than anything else. So it sort of fills in that gap.
Okay. Good. Essence. I like that. And that's really kind of the gist of the book, is that we're all of this essence. And to think anything else is just, once you experience it, it's hard to undo it.
Impossible to undo.
You can't unsee it. You can't unfeel it, experience it. And so how can you really hate anybody? Because it just doesn't make any sense. So being a contemplative, that Richard Rohr is, and I actually have tried to practice that in my life. He says contemplation is waiting patiently for gaps to be filled in, and it does not insist on quick closure or easy answers. So his first chapter is, and I'm going to go through the first 5 or 6 chapters. And then at the end, there's this, well, in fact, I think I'll start with this, because I found these concepts to be helpful. Go ahead.
I just was gonna make a comment to, before we go on beyond, I know in my life, I've had that feeling about people, that sense of that, but there's been different levels of finding that sense, and there's that sense of, when I was in a religion, I would see people and I would see who they really were, and then all of my effort was to try to get them to see that and change, you know, and it really didn't stay peaceful, you know, it was like, it was but now, part of the thing that Spirit has been saying is not only to love people, but to love their story, to love everything about them and to love their story. So my job is not to change them, but just to love their story and them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we all have our own journey. So to give a little bit of the last page that on the handout is 4 worldviews in the pattern of spiritual transformation that he has in the appendix of this book. And when I read them, I said, okay, this would have been helpful while I was reading the book. to kind of give a little bit of structure to. So he has 4 worldviews. The one is the material worldview, what we can see, science, matter, the physical world, to some extent the natural world, and so on and so forth. The spiritual world, and these are not like good or bad, or they're just kind of focuses. And so whenever you have a focus, if you get too narrow in your focus, there's things that we miss out on when we get too narrow in focus. And then spiritual worldview, more Platonic, Gnostic, primacy of the spirit consciousness being behind all manifestation, and not worrying so much about everyday life and things at hand. The priestly worldview is to try to put the world and spirit together, and also, as you mentioned it, that Wendy, when you were talking about that urge to try to help people, that's kind of the priestly worldview of trying to help people to put it together and figure it out, and then there's the incarnational worldview, which moves towards, which is evolutionary kind of in nature, and moves, and kind of incorporates the first 3 worldviews, and in his thinking, moves you towards direct social, practical, and immediate applications or implications of what it is that you see, so that there's an action, and that's why he calls it, you know, there used to be, I don't know, back in the 60s, there was, I grew up in Chicago, and there was this, people running around the university, they were the violent community for non-action or something. It was and they were like protesting, but they didn't really have an agenda, you know. and it was kind of a spoof, kind of like an Onion type of a spoof on. And in contemplation, you know, contemplative, you can, you know, there's some, you know, you say, well, you know, I'm gonna contemplate, you know, so, I'm not doing anything. And when we meditate, it's an act of not doing. Which he embraces, and yet his point is it should move us towards action at some point in time, and social action, and to with being informed by having a more wider view. So then he also talks about this pattern of spiritual transformation. And this really struck me because, like, we have 2 celebrations of lives this weekend here. And last week we just started the grief support group on Mondays. And it was like, oh, okay, this really fits right in. So this pattern of spiritual transformation is order, which is what we get comfortable with, well, our ego or whatever is telling us this is the way things are, followed by a period of disorder, which can come from, you know, anything from tragedies to great bounty but anything that really just shakes things up, and just, you know, a huge bolt of energy goes into a situation, and you're like, whoa, and you lose some things, and maybe you find some things, but it's not the same as it was. And then the process of then reorder. So we're, you know, after things have been shaken up and knocked around, you know, how do I make sense of this? Where do I put this? And I think it's so that it means that when there's loss, grief, major change that we didn't ask for, it's an opportunity for transformation. So I just thought that would be helpful to keep in mind as we go through some of the content. And he is a little bit wordy, but I can get that way too.
Just one comment.
Yeah, go ahead. Mike's behind you.
Okay. You were talking about having wished that you had put the back of the book in front. Whenever I pick up one of these books, I like to read the last chapter first, and then, because that's what he's getting at, and then everything should, from the beginning on, should point towards what he's really after.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think
that helps.
Yeah, it's a good point. A smart thing to do. I'm not surprised you do it. Mike?
Hey, Greg. Doll.
The challenging things, the ones are when it shakes everything up, and then what it's shooken up is some kind of fundamental identity or some fundamental rule that you have, that because it's not always like it's like I find right now it's shaking up, and it's everything in my life has been about use these principles to go into the world and change it and help people.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm getting stuff that is saying there comes a time when you have to stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to stop seeing the broken world. And that's when it's hard, because when you come to a place, I see that I don't see any place for me in that as that's unfolding. And that we have those ones that, you know, everything I did for most of my life was I did this so that I could help my broken family. And then when everything changes so that your family's not broken and you got to stop that, You're actually part of the brokenness by doing what you're doing. That's the things that leave you. Who am I now? Who am I now? Where am I? Everything has changed, and I don't even know who I am
It's
anymore.
like retirement.
Yeah.
I'm really starting to recognize a lot in my life is that everything is one thing. If I judge anything, I judge it. And I can't. I have to just let it be. Because he knows, or all that is knows what all that is needs, because each one of us are a part of all that is. And so your answers are in your head. Okay? And so for me, it helped me free myself up. I don't have to fix you anymore.
Right.
Okay? And in fact, I started looking at me trying to fix somebody as, well, that's kind of an arrogant ass, thinking that I can fix something. Correct? So now I can just love you no matter where you're at, what you're doing, or and feel an understanding of that individual and their pain, because they're in pain. It's hard to arrive here, go into the darkness, and then to come out in the end in the light. It's a hard thing to do. In fact, we spend many hours in pain because of it.
But I can see this. One is to bring Abraham into it a little bit, the whole idea of the art of allowing. And allow, applying that to other people, that you allow them. And the other is self-compassion. And we'll get into this. I think is a key concept in growth. So the first chapter in the book is Christ is not Jesus' last name. And so he tries to make that difference between that Jesus was his guy and the Christ, or the light that people saw in him. Then he started to call him Jesus Christ, and the Rohr posits that, of course, is that Christ is in everyone, and that somehow along the line it got, well, he was the only Son of God, and the rest of us, I don't know who we were. I don't really understand, the alternative explanation, but and
that allowed the Catholic Church to have a monopoly on salvation.
yes, and we'll get into that a little bit later about how that even, the need for that even arose or was created. And of course, a light, the Christ is a light that darkness cannot overcome, and God saw that the light was good. And the other thing I was going to point out is I have a few biblical notes on my handout, but the book has tons. He really researched and he has some metaphysical interpretation as well as what similar you would find from the Fillmores and other New Thought folks. But he does do his homework. He's has a lot, and he also focuses on the context of history in the church, and what was going on at the time when people said the things that they said. So it's not in a vacuum. he goes on to say, Christ is God, and Jesus is the Christ's historical manifestation of time. So, Jesus was this person who was able to embody and get hooked up and get in the flow, and was able to articulate that in the words of the people of his time. And according to Rohr, it was hugely misunderstood by future generations. I was on the way here and I was listening to the radio and then I was turned it off and I was just thinking about I don't know, it just came to me, but the old folk music group, Peter, Paul, and Mary. So if you think that was like what the church was like when it was just Peter, Paul, and Mary. So Peter was just the surviving apostle that was kind of in leadership. And Paul was going around spreading the word on the Mediterranean coastline. And Mary was doing whatever we don't have much written from that. But that, I kind of try to imagine what it was for those people who just actually had interactions with this guy called Jesus, who was kind of this mystical person who eventually started to just, get so in tune that he blew their minds. Logos, which we've heard Sue talk about when she's talking about this, means blueprint or primordial pattern of reality. The whole of creation, not just Jesus, is the beloved community. So the partner in the divine dance, everything is a child of God, no exceptions. There are only three things that last: faith, hope, and love. Everything else passes on. And so he looks at that as this faith, hope, and love is essence. The essence. Go ahead.
So did you say that the logos is like a fractal of the creation? You know what fractals are?
Yeah.
Would it be like a fractal of the creation? Because everything stems from it.
It is a primordial pattern of reality.
A hologram.
I actually know this one. Logos. Is this the Course in Miracles?
No.
No. What's the name of this book? It's been driving me
The
nuts.
universal Christ.
Okay.
Would you like a handout?
Sure. Logos, according to the law of one, he kind of describes it as different layers of being. So there's the logos, which is what the Bible in John calls the original thought. So there's the first logos, which is the universe and everything, and then all of the sub-logos beneath that is all the different layers. So like the galaxies would be the first sub-logos, and then the planets are the sub-sub-logos, and then the stars are the sub-sub-sub-logos, all the way down to the very first generation of life on Earth. So that's what Law of One says about logos. Anyway.
Right.
Yes.
And he uses logos too because it's something that was spoken in the time of the very early church. It was a word that was used and then it was changed over time. Christ is a good and simple metaphor for absolute wholeness, complete incarnation, and integrity of creation, and that Jesus is the archetypal human just like us. And that's based on Hebrews 4:15, and showed us what the full human might look like if we could fully live into it. Ephesians 4:12-16. Second chapter is called Accepting That You Are Fully Accepted. And here he's talking about that really God is all about relationship. itself. It's the of infinite love between divine diversity. So whether it's, loving on a redwood tree in Northern California, or your dog, or another human being, or looking in the mirror and seeing that essence coming back at you. Which, I think seems to be one of the hardest things in our culture, is the whole idea that I can have self-compassion, that I can sit with the pain that I feel, the shadow work, and love that part of me.
So I just have a question so that I can get my mind into a frame for this. So is this information talking about that, as humans, what we do is we want to understand things, and we find a way to make it make sense, and usually that is by placing something outside of ourselves in charge. And over time, that breaks down and doesn't work. And then we're back again looking for something to make sense of the thing. And again, we keep choosing something outside of ourselves. So is this information about the journey of not putting the power outside of ourselves? Or is it about seeing ourselves, finding the right power outside of ourselves? Am I making any sense?
You are, and the confusion's real because it's really both. Because he talks about it's a two-step dance of where there's the divine, there's grace, and we'll get to that. But that where there's grace, where we're not doing it's happening through us, but not. But then there's also what we're doing. So it's both. It's not either or. It's and. So we have a part. It's that whole idea of co-creation, the whole idea of both personal and impersonal essence. That there's this framework, but then we're interacting with it. And so we have our choices within this framework, and then some things happen when we just let it flow. But we have a part to play to put ourselves in that position.
So as technically, it's just, what I'm seeing is that we do here is this is just an experience. We have a greater soul of what we are, and that this is just an extension of that has entered into the material realm. And so here we are having experiences with one another, okay? And in that experience, we end up, hopefully at the end of our lives, understanding and caring for one another and making our way back to where we belong. It's just it's a forever journey.
Except I would take the time out, the time element out of it all right off the bat, because small children are just perfect love.
Oh yeah. I love
So it's not like you have to wait to do it at the end of your life, and we experience love at different times of our life, and then we don't. It's like the woman who had this experience of just seeing the Christ and everybody in the subway. It was like super vivid for a couple of days, and then it kind of faded. So it's the kind of the human physical experiences that we return back to the material viewpoint is a default, and we have and we have to actively choose to get in tune with it. another viewpoint. Microphone over to you.
I remember when I was at Unity Village, doing like a retreat or something, like we had a kind of a time we got to take apart to just kind of, meditate in the village, and I was watching the fountains, and that, like, the metaphysical example for me was watching one of the fountains of the village, and I was kind of meditating on it and lost in watching this stream of water, like out of a fire hose, coming out all together, and then watching the drops individuate, and then watching it return back to the pool, and just kind of seeing it cycle. And to me, that's kind of the thing. So, but I feel like it's what you're talking about too. That whole before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
There you go.
Hey, John, can you explain in this on back, sorry, I can't see the page, where it talks about original sin by Augustine in the 5th century?
Yeah, so he's trying to explain, the Garden of Eden stuff. And so he actually created a concept of original sin in the 5th century. So what hasn't always been, it was something that was man created in the 500s, 6th century. I said 5th century. But it's never mentioned in the Bible. Original sin, the words original sin are not biblical. That's something that was interpreted. And taught and became canonized and all that good stuff.
It's Constantine's church needed to create fear to keep the people in line.
Right. Yeah. And it was a perfect control mechanism.
Exactly.
To
Still is.
have original sin, and you need us to not burn in the fires of hell.
That's it.
And it's really easy for us to look at those kinds and look and say, the church was just trying to control. But I don't think that the masses would have called forth that kind of a dynamic if they weren't looking for somebody to take responsibility and lead them. It's within, we're doing it today. We're still doing it today. We want somebody to fix it and somebody to do it. And
Win the lottery!
and so we create religiously, I think there was a huge sigh of relief when the church wanted to be the all-powerful one, and you didn't have to think.
Absolutely. And the early, some of the other religions were, other than early Christian religion, there was this seeing the gods from above. In the Greek mythology, and early Roman mythologies, along those lines.
That's exactly what the children of Israel did with Moses. Tell us what to do. Give us the law. And then we'll, try and follow the law, which they didn't do very well. But, that's part of this human nature, is to want somebody else to be responsible. And it's a big step that when you take the step to claim that responsibility for yourself. But humans want to blame something.
It's like, I don't know, you're familiar with Alan Watts? And he wrote a book called The Book. And the subtitle of the book is On the Taboo of Knowing Who You Are. and that's just kind of says it. And there's generally a fear, because if we really look very deeply, we go, oh, that. What does that move me to do? And then it's my responsibility. So he says that Richard says he's been called a pantheist, or the person who believes that the universe is God. And he says no, he's a panentheist. He says that God lies within all things and also transcends, which gets to this whole thing about this two-step dance, where we are all God, aspects of God, and getting to know ourselves puts us in that position of being able to co-create and to do, and yet there's also this aspect of letting go and letting God, or of letting it flow, however you want to term it, but there's both aspects.
There's this danger in this panentheism that if we start saying that we are God, we are not all of God, because this, if you're going to talk about cosmos, we're a little speck in one corner of one of the billions of planets that are in no way unusual. We are expressions of God, but we are not all what God is, and that's important. We very often say that I am God, and you're a God, and together we are God.
But that's not what they say.
No,
I don't hear that. I don't hear what he says, and I don't hear it in what.
but we have to remember that there could be other people in the universe.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
So I just had one quick thing on what a realization that I'm kind of getting to is I recognize the action part of all of this, but the action part of all of this is not the goal. The action part is the natural outcome, not the goal. And what I see happen is my job is not to figure out what I'm going to do. It's to figure out what I'm going to be, and then I let the doing come naturally from that. If I do it the other way around, what I need to figure these things out so I know what to do, I go right back into ego. I go right back into, I've got something to accomplish. But if I am that, so I watch people do things. We have things at the church here, or I've gone to peace rallies. When they begin to do it, the whole reason that we're doing it gets lost in the doing of it. Mm-hmm. We become anxious, and we become argumentative with one another, and we got to get it done, and we go right out of our spiritual self to get our spiritual work done. And we need to, and I see that the important is to do it the opposite way around.
So he mentions in the book that we're responsible for looking at what, but not the how and when. He says, I've never been separate from God, nor can I be, except in my mind. And this, who he calls, this is the cosmic Christ, who always was, who became incarnate in time, and who is still being revealed. He talks about the ancients' access to God. In other words, he's saying that this Christ occurred way before Jesus. It's always been. It's not something that the Christ came when Jesus was born. The Christ was always. And that the ancients had belief that, and that their spiritual journeys, are universal and transformative journeys of great love and great suffering. And this is getting at the, you know, this need for humanity, for humans, to love, and the risk that that creates for suffering. And not only risk, it's like, well, it's a done deal. It's gonna, if you love, you're gonna hurt. It just comes with it. Okay? And that it's so deep that then we have this yearning for, you know, some understanding, some, you know, how do I navigate this? What, you know, and that's the look for something beyond us to help that spiritual motivation to become spiritual, to find a spiritual entity, and that's always been. If we are, and then he talks about kind of the difference between getting micro-focused on something and being able to kind of back up and have this worldview. And he says, if we're inherently skeptical and suspicious, our focus narrows. If we are hopeful and trusting, the focus continues to expand. We can see more. We have more of a broad perspective. And he talks some about the, let's see. And this goes back to the original sin stuff. And some of the church fathers Martin Luther portrayed humans as a pile of manure. John Calvin instituted his now famous doctrine of total depravity. And poor Jonathan Edwards famously condemned the New Englanders as sinners in the hands of an angry God. And that all came from this kind of original sin mindset. It kind of narrowed things down, put folks into a box, and there's something that, you know, this book is kind of a response to that, to say, okay, come on, let's open up. Let's not just. So then the next chapter is original goodness. Divine perfection is precisely the ability to include what seems like imperfection. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. That's Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Let me repeat that. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. Okay. Then he gets into kind of some definitions on faith, hope, and love. Says, and he uses trust as a basis. He says, faith is trust in inner coherence itself. And a trust that this coherence is positive and going somewhere good is hope. And a trust that this coherence includes me and even defines me is love. Which leads into the next chapter, which is love is the meaning. Know it well, love is its meaning. Who reveals it to you? Love? What does he reveal? Love. Why? For love. Remain in this, and you will know more of the same. By Lady Julia of Norwich. That was like 1500s. So he describes love as a paradox. And this gets to what you're talking about. It's a flow of energy willingly allowed and exchanged without requiring payment in return. Love flows around every obstacle, like water. And like water, it flows down to the lowest level. And he talks about forgiveness is often the most powerful display of love in action. That when we forgive, we acknowledge that there is, in fact, something to forgive. A mistake, an offense, an error. But you notice the lack of judgment in those terms. But instead of reverting to survival mode, which includes the judgment, he says we release the offending party from any need for punishment or recrimination. So and he says unforgiveness lives in the repetitive past, which you can't let go of. So even if you punish the other person and you don't forgive them, you still relive it over and over and over again. And are caught in it. And reliving it. And, and it's nothing to say that we don't need boundaries or other things like that. It's just this process of how we process what is occurring to us. He also talks about, it's got a little subchapter on waking up, but it's really more about, I was curious about why you use that subchapter called waking up, because it really talks more about how obedience is used to keep people down and not awake. And about love being in the love zone is waking up. And he talks, this one phrase really got me, he says, cleaning up, and he talks about that obedience is kind of the cleaning up what seems messy and painful and hurtful and stuff. And he says, cleaning up is a constant process that comes on different timetables for different people, around many different issues, and for very different motivations. That's why love and growth demand discernment, not enforcement. And that love is free. Freeing and free. And that and that's why trying to help people is almost demeaning. And if it's not done in the spirit that it's really intended, because maybe they don't want to change their situation right now. They're not ready. It's not their time. And maybe they know more than you do about something. And you know they know more about what's going on inside of them than you do. So it's something to be very delicate with and to, be aware of, are you invited? And he says, but God rewards me for letting him reward me. This is the divine two-step that we call grace. I am doing it, and yet I am not doing it. It is being done unto me, and yet by me too. Yet God always takes the lead in the dance, which we only recognize over time. And that's kind of the waking up, that awareness of when we're doing versus when it's being done through us. Sacred wholeness. He has a quote that I like. In fact, God seems to send us on a path towards our own wholeness, not by eliminating the obstacles, but by making use of them. So the whole thing about praying to be delivered from this pain or this whatever, sometimes that's not the thing. Sometimes it's plowing through it and figuring out how, what do you learn through the process of going through this situation. And then the God archetype is the part of you that drives you toward greater inclusivity by deep acceptance of the real. And by the real, I take that as, yeah, this is what's happening. This is reality. It is what it is. This is what's happening. Balancing opposites. So not necessarily, which basically is non-judgmental stance. Taking, it's this and this, not this or this. They're both present. They're both right here. You cannot like it. You cannot like people who are on the opposite side of the political spectrum from you and but it's there. And simple, and how much we can understand it more is part of that. Simple compassion towards ourselves. Again, I think that's understood. And the ability to recognize and forgive your own shadow. A big part of forgiveness is self-forgiveness, and that's just... And then finally, if something comes towards you with grace and can pass through you and towards others with grace, you can trust that it's the voice of God. There's a quote. And that's the end of part one.
Okay, thank you.
And let's see, we have some announcements.
I'll also pass the basket, and if you're watching online and would like to give, you can go to www.unityofspringfield.org.
Thank you. The celebration of life for John Atkinson is today at 3:33 p.m. Meditation is tonight at 6 p.m. and open to everyone. The Navigating Grief Support Group is tomorrow and every Monday at 6 p.m. The group offers support, healing, and coping skills. This is a structured, open support group, and all are welcome to attend. The church will be closed on Thursday for the 4th of July. Chair yoga and drum circle are canceled this Thursday, 4th of July. In the New Thought and World Religion class at 9:15 next Sunday, John Braucher will present part 2 on Richard Rohr's book, The Universal Christ. July 7th is our annual picnic. Please bring a side dish or dessert to share, and the church will provide the entree. We need to know how much to purchase, so please sign up in the foyer. On July 14th, right after service, there will be an informational meeting to explain what it means to do the live stream or slides for our Sunday services. If you are interested in learning more about either of these, please plan to stay for the meeting. On Sunday, July 14th, and continuing the second Sunday each month from 4:30 to 5:30, Jean Andres will facilitate a group called Practical Prayer, Energy for Healing. This class will focus on methods of energy healing and energy centers. Participants will learn and then be able to practice these techniques. Our May and June Earth Care initiative is to purchase indoor and outdoor recycling containers. We've raised $300 of the $560 we need to cover the cost. You are more than welcome to donate towards this at any time. It's time to announce the winner of the custom pet portrait. So that'll be during service this morning at 11:30. All right. If you want, we can go ahead and meet up for circle break.
I don't know.